I'm making a reading wrap-up every week until I'm all caught up, and this week we have a truly monstrous set of books to go over. And unfortunately, I must admit that I did this to myself. Let's talk about December of 2021, a month where I read 33 books. God, this is going to be a pain to edit. Anyways, December was a pretty okay month. I won the Reindeer Readathon. I participated in the sadly non-competitive Queer Lit Readathon, and challenged myself to read all of World Trigger in 1 week. I stayed inside, got cozy, and tried to prepare for the year ahead of me, and that's how I read 33 books in 1 month. Now let's talk about the books. Let's start by talking about children's literature. I read 2 kids' books in December. First, I read Oh My Gods by Stephanie Cook, Andrea Fitzpatrick, and Juliana Moon. This is a comic book that's about the Greek gods in modern day. 13-year-old Karen moves to Greece for a year to live with the mysterious and eccentric father, Zed. Unfortunately, nobody has told her that her new school, Mount Olympus Junior High, is actually on Mount Olympus, and that her new classmates are literal gods, which makes it even scarier once people start turning into stone. Our main character, Karen, is completely oblivious and keeps trying to rationalize all of the strange happenings that keep happening until someone directly tells her what's going on, because her parents never mentioned that she was a demigod. The story wasn't overly complicated, and I think this could be really fun for younger readers. What really makes this book great, though, is the art. The graphic novel has spectacular visual storytelling that really sells the whole thing. Honestly, I think if this book had even someone slightly less skilled doing the art, the whole thing would have fallen apart. It was fun and imaginative and felt sort of like an oversimplistic Scooby-Doo mystery where it was very obvious to the reader the entire time what was going on. But it's alright. I'm giving Oh My Gods by Stephanie Cook, Andrea Fitzpatrick, and Juliana Moon 3 stars. The other children's book I read was Arusha and the Song of Death by Rashani Chokshi. This is the second book in the Pandava Quintet. This whole series is a modern retelling of the stories of the Pandava brothers from the Mahabharata, an epic Hindu poem. Our heroes, the Pandava siblings, have been reincarnated and must save the world. Unfortunately, once it's time to save the world, they're all still in middle school. Shortly after the events of the first book, Arusha is starting to get used to the other world and is starting to get a grasp of her powers. That's when someone steals the god of love's bow and arrow, uses it to build an army of heartless zombies, and frames the whole thing on her. Truly frightening. The Pandava sisters must now find the true culprit, return the bow and arrow, and clear their names. This is an amazing adventure with a growing cast. It is filled with friendship, learning to be vulnerable and emotionally honest, and learning how to become a family with their reincarnated siblings who they've never met before. I especially appreciated the way that it taught about how so many people's stories have been lost to history, how people are more complex than the way they are depicted in mythologies and stories. I think it's good to teach kids to question stories, to examine biases that might exist within a work, and to show them just how many different stories exist in the world that you can be inspired by. I'm giving Arusha and the Song of Death by Rashani Chokshi 4 stars. Next, I read 3 adult fiction books, a comic, a novel, and a short story anthology. The comic I read was Spy Family, Volume 1 by Tatsuya Endo. This is about a spy who needs to go deep undercover and infiltrate an elite school to befriend a parent of one of the students. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a kid, so he adopts one. The child he adopts happens to be able to read minds. She is very excited to be a part of the secret mission that she is not supposed to know about. Spy also needs to find a wife, and he finds one, a woman who, unbeknownst to him, is an assassin who needs a husband to keep her cover. Every single moment in this book is amazing. This is an adventurous, high-stakes comedy because yes, every moment in this book is hilarious, even in giant action sequences. I'm giving Spy Family Volume 1 by Tatsuya Endo 5 stars. I'm not sure who the translator is. The novel I read was Kate in Waiting by Becky Albertalli. This novel is about 2 best friends who keep having mutual crushes. Kate Garfield and her gay best friend Anderson Walker have had crushes on the same boys ever since middle school. Neither of them have ever had a boyfriend though, but when their latest crush from summer camp, Matt, moves to their town and joins their theater program, things get more complicated because now they have a crush on a guy they actually have a chance with. This story is told from a straight Jewish girl's point of view, which is something Becky Albertalli has done before, even though she's better known for her novels with queer protagonists. Overall, what I loved about this book was the love within it. Not necessarily the romantic love, although those scenes were cute, but I loved the friendships. I love the emphasis on how platonic love and friendships shape you as you grow up and help you become the kind of person you want to be. I also love the enthusiasm in which all of the characters approach their high school musical theater program because honestly, same. I was absolutely that kid listening to the original Broadway cast recordings of whatever show my school was going to put on next and rehearsing monologues in the hallways. Overall, it's a sweet and joyful story about a very enthusiastic and kind group of teenagers. I'm giving Kate in Waiting by Becky Albertalli 4 stars. The last young adult fiction book I picked up was actually a short story anthology, All Out, the No Longer Secret Stories of Queer Teens Throughout the Ages, edited by Sandra Mitchell. There were plenty of familiar authors in this short story anthology: Mackenzie Lee, Taylor K. Meha, Melinda Lowe, Robin Talley, and Dahlia Adler, to name a few. But there were also plenty of authors who were included who I've never even heard of before, and I loved their stories too. The historical fiction element really pulled me in because every story came about in such a different world. Almost everything was so unfamiliar, with everything happening from Robin Hood retellings to 1970s roller disco. There were such vibrant settings and times to tell these stories, and I had a great time reading this anthology and discovered a lot of new authors that I want to start reading. I'm giving All Out, the No Longer Secret Stories of Queer Teens Throughout the Ages, edited by Sandra Mitchell, 4 stars. So my next genre is complicated. I read 22 science fiction books, but they're all from the same series. The week between Christmas and New Year's, I challenged myself to read the entire World Trigger series by Daisuke Ashihara. I read the first 22 volumes in December and the last few on New Year's Day. These volumes of World Trigger were translated by Lillian Olson, Sarah Taney, Christine Dashiell, Toshikazu Aizawa, and Caleb Cook. Translators are so important to both my ability to read these stories because my Japanese is bad and I am functionally illiterate in that language, so thank God for translators who helped give this artistic and beautiful creation new life by sharing it with an English audience. These first 22 volumes cover most of the series and the first 3 seasons of the anime. Season 3 just ended, and I have to say World Trigger is one of my favorite animes of all time, which is a big reason I actually picked up the books. This series is about a world which was attacked a few years ago by these giant monsters that traveled here from another world. They call them neighbors. In order to protect their city, lots of teenagers enlisted in a military-like installation called a border in order to defend their homes. One below-average trainee, Osamu Mikumo, discovers that the new kid in his class, Yuma Kuga, is actually a neighbor who has come to this world for help on the instructions of his late father. This new kid, this neighbor, is unbelievably talented and capable when it comes off to fighting these larger neighbor monsters. It's weird, beautiful, funny, and if you like science fiction, sports manga, or battle manga, I think you should read these books. I would kill to protect any of the characters in these books. There is going to be a full review and a reading vlog coming up on my channel soon. I'm giving World Trigger Volumes 1 through 22 by Daisuke Ashihara and translated by Lillian Olson, Sarah Taney, Christine Dashiell, Toshikazu Aizawa, and Caleb Cook, 4 stars. Our next genre is fantasy books. I read 3 fantasy books in December. I finished reading all of the published Stormlight Archive books by Brandon Sanderson in December, which means I also finished reading all of the Cosmere books that have been published all in the year 2021. I'm so proud of myself. I'll do my best to avoid major spoilers. However, if you don't want any spoilers in the Stormlight Archive books, go ahead and skip to the non-fiction section. First, I read Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. This is the 3rd book of the Stormlight Archive. This book has a strong focus on Dalinar Kholin, a strong general who has always been looked to lead ever since the latest war began. He's learned that his fight is too narrow and he must look to unite a world that deeply distrusts him. This book also features Kaladin Stormblast, hurriedly making his way home to warn his family of the destruction that is coming their way, even though he hasn't seen his parents in years. And Shallan, who is busy uncovering secrets in their new mountain home. Dangerous secrets. It is very challenging to discuss the 3rd book in the series without giving anything too big away, but I really liked it. I really like this book. I found it traumatic, and the book fundamentally changed the ways that I view certain characters as more and more information got revealed, and it is always great to have so much flipped on its head by just knowing a little bit more about someone's past or why they're making their decisions now. I'm giving Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson 4 stars. Next, I read the novella Dawn Shard by Brandon Sanderson. This book featured some of my favorite characters. Risen, a character who so far has been pretty unconnected to the main plot. They trained as a merchant and adopted something similar to a dragon after an accident made it so they were unable to use their legs. They use a wheelchair that is not functional or designed for independent use. This book also heavily features Lopin, a self-deprecating insult comic who, before becoming a Knight Radiant, only had 1 arm. They are on a quest to a mysterious, abandoned island to discover its secrets, its riches, and what happened to the last crew who went on this quest who all went missing and are presumed dead. My favorite moments in this book are around the discussions of disability and how to navigate a world that isn't built for you and the challenges around accessibility, as well as a particular scene about how disabled people are constantly trying to make able-bodied people feel comfortable. I just thought it was pretty well done and was pleasantly surprised at how the topic was handled. I'm giving Dawn Shard by Brandon Sanderson 4 stars. The last fantasy book I read in December was Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, the most recently published Thornlight Archive book, and is the 4th novel in the series. This book takes place a year after Oathbringer, and the war is still basically at a standstill. But our queen, Navani Kholin, has been behind some rapid technological advancements. Her daughter, Yasna, also a queen, has been behind some rapid cultural advancement, as she challenges the cultural institutions of duels to the death to defend honor, and also slavery. She challenges the institution of slavery. And the men in this novel are also there. Dalinar goes off to battle again. Kaladin needs to find a new way to be there for his men while dealing with his PTSD and depression. And Shallan brings Adolin along on a mission to Shadesmar to recruit more honest men to the war cause. It's basically a giant mess, which adds complexity to every faction involved in the war, making things more complicated, not just in the war effort, but for us as readers. I am giving Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson 4 stars. Our last genre today is nonfiction. I read 3 very stylistically different nonfiction books in December. The first nonfiction book I read was How to Be Interesting in 10 Simple Steps by Jessica Hagee. This is essentially an illustrated book of aphorisms. I bought it on a whim on a trip to Boston a few years ago because it looked like a fun book. And it is genuinely a fun book. I like aphorisms and charts and graphs, and this book contains all of them. Does the book actually contain good advice on how to be an interesting person? Sure, sort of, but mostly it just had some interesting illustrations and typography, and that's really what I wanted to get out of this book. But hey, maybe I'll try actually implementing some of the advice so that people like me. I'm giving How to Be Interesting in 10 Simple Steps by Jessica Hagee 3 stars. I also read the nonfiction comic Queer, A Graphic History by Meg John Barker and Julia Shiel. I thought this was going to be a book about queer history and major historical events, but this was actually a history book about queer theory and the lines of thought that developed into the academic movement. I was surprised, but I continued reading it, and I did find it to be an accessible explainer about queer theory. I should say that I was already acquainted with this line of academic study, though, so it's not like I needed the introduction. I think by being within the queer community itself, you also have a lot of conversations that were brought up in this book naturally, because you don't need to have a PhD to know the problems you experience. Also, I think anyone who needs an introduction to queer theory and queer issues probably needs more than this book offered to get a real sense of what's going on now in queer communities. So, I'm not entirely sure who this book is for. I also think more of this book could have been illustrated. This was a fairly text-heavy comic with paragraphs of text being accompanied by illustrations, rather than illustrations being the majority of the work and getting the point across. This book also focused on white critics throughout the ages, kind of avoided the topic of gender altogether, and was kind of flat. I didn't love this book, but I do think it could be an effective teaching tool when paired with other materials. I'm giving Queer, A Graphic History by Meg John Barker and Julia Shiel 3 stars. Finally, the last book I'm going to talk about today is We Are the Weather, Saving the Planet Begins at Breakfast by Jonathan Safran Foer. This book is written in essays, some personal, some informative, and the purpose is all about fighting climate change and what we can do on a personal level that would impact the structural level. It is filled with personal strategies for combating climate change and often begins with stories seemingly unrelated to climate change as analogies to get people to buy into the feeling of climate change as a world-changing event. When people reading this have probably already accepted that climate change is real, but it feels like a distant threat and not an everyday reality. I thought it was good, and I have on some level bought into the premise to eat a more plant-based diet, and to make an effort in every moment of my life instead of trying to be some perfect, eco-friendly, and environmentally savvy version of myself that will never exist. Because a zero-waste perfectionist, I am not. Do I, over a month later, still feel as strongly about what this book told me? No, absolutely not. I am less committed to stopping climate change in my everyday life than I was immediately after reading this book. But more committed than I was before reading the book. I think that's a good thing. I am giving We Are the Weather, Saving the Planet Begins at Breakfast by Jonathan Safran Foer 4 stars. Those are all 33 books I read in December. I am going to go take a nap. Tell me down in the comments, what's the weather like where you are? It's snowing here, and I've been trapped inside my apartment. And if you want to see more from me, please subscribe, watch another video of mine, or support me on Patreon. And hey, I love you.